Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Brandon and Ruby, where this is the anti-fitness wankery, where we're undoing the bullshit of the industry that has overcomplicated everything and that has left more people in, I was going to say confused, but because I like pickles, it's left more people in a pickle than it has actually given us the direction that all of this information should. Because as we were speaking before this podcast, something that was repeating itself, ironically, was that repetition repeats. Or what was the quote?
Repetition legitimizes.
There we go. Repetition legitimizes. What you practice is what becomes a lot more permanent. So you can practice more and more the negative habits, or you can practice more and more the ones that actually move you forward. And if you're a reader, I highly recommend reading The Slight Edge, because the whole premise in that book is exactly what I've been speaking to lately, in how what you're doing, it's not keeping you stuck, and it's not just putting things on hold. If you're not improving or focusing in the right direction, just focusing in the right direction and trying to shift things or unlearn things, that is still moving you forward. But if you're not doing any of that work, you're actually regressing, because time kind of expands that. And I feel like a lot of women get trapped in this place because it is so easy to believe what we fundamentally believe to be true, or we are scared of what happens on the other side of change, which undeniably so, change is really difficult. But this then goes back to the principle of practice kind of ingrains things in. The more that you do something, the more that it's going to be your reality. And this is why we started the podcast off with, let's figure out where you are now. And we kind of spoke about the basics of all of that stuff, because without a foundation, nothing is going to stick. And I think so many people go into diets without realizing that huge thing. And I'm going to take from a comment from the post that I put in that group, where someone said, yeah, and so many women don't realize that even if you still have fat to lose, it doesn't mean you just stay in fat loss. You need to actually take a break at maintenance. And she only learned that the hard way. And she's actually lucky that she learned that and that she's acting on it, because the sad reality is that the majority of people don't. And it doesn't make sense if you're sitting there listening to us and we're saying, let's fuel, let's eat carbs, let's actually have lollies before you work out, or whatever that is. If you're sitting there, look down, you hate your thighs touching each other, you hate your belly rolls, and you're feeling like, well, that's not for me. But yes, it is very much for you, because how long have you been thinking those thoughts? How long have you been trying things your way? This is a podcast that is going to change things for you, because when we pull from the fitness wankery, we're not just demonizing it. We're explaining why it is so believable for you to grasp onto it. Without a foundation, nothing is going to be built. And calories matter, but they aren't all that matters. Food quality matters, but it's not all that matters. Cardio matters, but it's not all that matters. Weight training matters, but it's not all that matters. And yeah, we want to work hard, but we also want to rest and recover hard as well. But the biggest thing is that none of that matters if you're still stuck in the same mindset that has kept you stuck the whole time, because you can start anything, you can make some progress, and that's what's going to pull you back, because everything is connected. So with that, let's start off this conversation talking about what we said we were going to talk about last podcast, because it kind of integrates into this. No matter what we do in the gym, the way that we perform the exercises is what we have learned over time. It's what we've practiced over time. Faulty movement patterns. And because the biggest piece of this is the way that we warm up into the session, we have this idea that we need to do these stretches, we need to do these mobility drills. Our body just feels really tight. That's where a lot of confusion comes in. And I don't really know your whole principles around this, but something that I iterate as often as I can is that strength training done well is mobility. Strength training done well is injury prevention. Stretching has a place in this, but stretching is never going to get you anywhere. It's never going to do anything. It's never going to increase your mobility. It's never going to, like, who cares if you're flexible or mobile in one range of motion if the second that something throws you, I was going to say sagittally, something throws you in a different direction than what your body can handle, or if there is load in that, or you need to pick yourself up off the floor, there is your body weight to pick up. What's like, how much does that range of motion then matter if you can't add load to it? If you can't be resilient and stable through that? If you can't be strong through that? But sometimes we need to pre-warm that. For example, a rear foot / Bulgarian split squat, we can preamble that with a couch stretch. But there's no point in just doing a couch stretch because that's not going to stick if we don't progressively overload that over time. If more than anything, okay, we got a really good run into this because I feel like next podcast we can go into breathing and bracing even more. But none of that matters. I actually got this one. This finally clicked when I was talking to my therapist because she used a little PNF stretching. That's when you move into a certain range of motion, but that's not going to do shit if your nervous system is still bung up. So you need to be breathing through it. You need to be relaxing through it. And then you need to release a little. And then you need to push into it, but you push deeper into it. But that's going to feel tight. Your body's going to want to knee jerk out of it. So that's where you breathe, relax into it. And then you do it again and maybe another time. And now all of a sudden you went from moving 5 centimeters or whatever that is in inches, let's just say 2 inches, 5 centimeters, into 8 to 10 centimeters, 3 inches, 4 inches, something like that. And that was all within a session. But if you come back next session, you're going to be all bung up again because you didn't load it, because you didn't train it. And this is, again, regardless of whether you load it and train it, you're still going to come bung up again. It's that repetition. It's that repetition. But also, you know how I said how everything matters? Oh, there's so much for you to go off. I'm excited to hear it all. But you know how everything matters? If your lifestyle has not been addressed, none of that matters because you don't spend that much time in the gym. You don't spend that much time doing this shit. People that are injured, my clients, when they're injured, it happens outside of the gym. And the miraculous thing is they recover so much quicker because of the shit they do in the gym. That is where all of this pieces together. So I think that is a really great place to take this because that breathing piece, that relaxing into it piece, that reiteration piece, that practice piece matters. It's not just what you do, it's how you do it. But if I had to add another layer to this, if we only think of this in terms of let's maximize muscle as much as we can, let's maximize strength as much as we can, and see, or if my target audience, as an example, we see it as let's train to get as lean as possible, as burn as much energy as possible. Training is an insurance policy. It's everything combined. You don't lose weight in the gym. You want to train to build muscle, yes, but what's the whole point building muscle if you're going to get set back and injured? Because the whole point of this is to stay as injured as possible. You're going to get injured regardless because that is inevitable. Like there is something that's going to pull you out in some way. Our goal is to build you up strong enough to come back stronger. So with that, I'm really keen to see where you take this. I had one other point, but I forget it. So off you go.
Well, I think the post that you were talking about, or one of the posts you were talking about, was really good. Like calories matter, but they're not all that matters. Macros matter, but they're not all that matters. Food quality matters, but it's not all that matters. Cardio matters, but it's not, et cetera, et cetera. There's always nuance, which is exactly how I would talk about this: range of motion, flexibility versus mobility. And I think this is where we want to I kind of talk about the difference between the two. Flexibility is I can take your leg and put it here. You can take your leg and it only goes to here, right? Under active control. So that difference between those two, that's what we'd call the danger zone. Flexibility is passive range of motion. It can be put there by an external force. Mobility is you can put it there internally under conscious control, and you have motor control. And so the smaller you can close that gap down, the safer you're going to be for one. And so talking about stretching before or after a workout, yes, strength training is mobility work. However, if we can throw in a little extra mobility, the way I kind of talk to my clients about it is we're breaking out the cobwebs before the workout. We're not going to spend half an hour doing yoga before we go lift, but I might spend 5 or 10 minutes going through ranges of motion that are going to be important for today's movement, just to make sure there's nothing. Sometimes you kind of have stuff waiting. Those injuries that you tend to get, some of the injuries I've seen, it's like, okay, this one may have been a long time coming. You're under recovered, you've been overtraining, whatever. Sometimes it's just bad luck. Oftentimes it's poor load management. That's the most common one. But sometimes it's like, I kind of wish I had done more warm-up sets to feel this out and see what's going on. Because sometimes there's a kink in the hose and you don't realize it. Sometimes there's something that's not feeling right and you don't know it until you start moving around. And so like stretching can help kind of expose some of those things so that you can call an audible if necessary that day. But that's not even the main reason for it for me. For me, it's you feel better. Our stretch routine is about 5 or 10 minutes. If I'm in a hurry, we can get it done in 5 minutes total, because we're not going to hold these stretches for a minute. We're going to hold them for a few seconds. Does that give you more range of motion in the long term? It depends. If you do it before your workout and you work out 3 to 5 times a week, probably not. If you do it 3 to 5 times a day, that repetition legitimizes. And each time you do it is another etch. It's another reminder to your nervous system that you do, in fact, have access to this range of motion in this position at that joint. Some of the stretches that I think are non-negotiable are a posterior hip capsule stretch and a T-spine rotation / flexion extension stretch, something that gives you control over those two things. The reason being, I think I mentioned this in the last podcast, a squat probably isn't going to stretch your posterior hip capsule, but you may get a pinch in the front of your hip as you get down toward the bottom. I definitely have clients on occasion who have this issue where we call it femoral acetabular impingement, FAI. So like there's a pinch, or at least it's FAI-like symptoms, because there's a pinch in the front as the hip goes into flexion. Generally, in my experience, when the femur doesn't glide back in the joint, it will come forward and you'll get a pinching sensation, or maybe even just a stuck sensation. There's no stretch. You don't have access to the backside of your hip. And if you don't have access to it, you're not going to be very successful trying to train it.
I got a question that I really want you to talk about, because I feel like instead of talking about it, I rather ask you, because I feel like this is a huge issue with so many women. I want you to talk on why this is such a huge issue and how this then impacts the biggest goal of so many is to grow their glutes, or is to have like hamstrings. Aren't just like, so there are the type of people that don't care about hamstrings because they want to look like a doll with a lollipop head on the top with their glutes. But then there are those that actually want to look like they lift. And even if you don't care, you need strong hamstrings, because without that, your knees are going to fuck up. Like, it is essential to have strong hamstrings for your knees. But also, as you age, that's going to be the thing that catches you when you fall. There are so many things with that hamstring, but it is hard to access those things without internal rotation. I would blame it a lot more on shoes, because I was going to ask you about internal rotation, but I needed to give a little for that, because that's my little
That's exactly what I was writing down.
Most people do not have access to the internal range of motion that they need with their hips. And in simple terms, that means when you go into squat, for an example, I'm going to list 2 things, because you can probably take this many ways. The first one is too many people sit in their heels when they do everything. They don't sit on their front of their toes. They don't use their big toe. And that's really difficult to do when you're in some engagement of a shoe that compresses everything. And especially if you're wearing runners that curl up at the front. Even flat shoes do the same thing, which is why I highly recommend, if you don't want to spend a lot of money on barefoot shoes, get yourself deadlift slippers and use it for everything, because that you can actually press down and feel the floor. But let's talk about internal rotation, why it's so important, how we can get better at it. And also the thing that I remember that I wanted you to bring into this is something that I found has been super beneficial for a couple of my clients, especially when I was doing in-person training. I never got them to do mobility drills. I got them to do the hip lift with a foam roller in between their knees, get their adductors engaged, get their core engaged, and about 5 minutes. Instead of the 5 minute stretching, the 5 minutes was on breathing, getting their body and their core engaged so their body feels safe. And that's how I got this particular, I remember this client, clear as crystal. She could only squat down about 10 centimeters. I got her ass all the way down without any lower back grounding from the practicing of the drills of just getting her adductors engaged with her core, with eventually her hamstrings and her glutes coming engaged, because everything is connected. And if your body doesn't trust you to be safe in those ranges, it's not going to go there. And this is going to tie into everything that we've said before that I'm going to bring up after your spiel, because habit change, little by little, like boiling a frog, you slowly disintegrate into stuckness and worseness without even realizing. You think you feel fine, but you don't even know that happened, because slowly you disintegrated. And the same thing happens in getting better. In the habits you practice, we want them moving forward. And that's the same here. Go.
Yeah, I was going with on the knees, like hamstrings, and then you went right to it, was internal rotation at the hip. I was going to say hamstrings and motor control at the hip. There's a wonderful article out there called the Joint by Joint Approach. And yeah, it's a little bit of a simplification of a concept, but that's kind of the point. Like, there are always outliers. We're speaking to the bell curve for the most part. Your joints tend to alternate in terms of what each joint craves. This joint craves a little bit more mobility. This joint craves a little bit more stability. The hip craves more mobility. Yes, it also provides stability. The joint craves stability because a mobile knee is a torn ACL. The knee is just a hinge joint. If you mobilize that with a lot of rotation or lateral flexion, you're going to have some very big issues, right? So the knee, in my experience with a lot of my knee pain clients, and we do have a very good track record working with knee pain, especially like the simple like patellofemoral stuff that's so common. The knee is rarely the knee. Outside of somebody coming at you with a hammer or there being some kind of trauma directly to the joint, the knee is rarely the knee. It's usually stuck between, a hip that lacks motor control, and maybe it lacks motor control because it doesn't have enough neural input, which is another point I'm going to make here in a little bit. And likely an immobile or an ankle or foot that doesn't have enough neural input. Again, the big toe, as you mentioned, is actually kind of it's kind of a game. There's well, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but suffice to say, you do need good control over big toe extension and flexion. You need to be able to lift your big toe in isolation of the other four, and you need to be able to lift the other four in isolation of the big toe. You need control over your foot because your foot is a sensory organ before it is the thing you stand on. So it's the thing that is telling the rest of your body what to do. And as you were mentioning about the shoes, like, I wouldn't put on some fat gloves and then try to type an essay because I want more input from the keyboard. That said, there are situations where I'm forced to wear shoes, so I just wear these cheap, minimal shoes that give me the most input possible. Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you. Say that again.
You wouldn't be able to bend your fingers either, kind of like the foot. You wouldn't be able to do what you need to do with the toes.
Right. So many of my older clients who come in with like back pain and they kind of hobble around, when we get them to take off their shoes and you look at the feet, like the feet are just, they've been crushed over years and years. The feet are supposed to spread. They're supposed to do kind of like that, and when you lose that, you lose a lot more than you think. And some people get lucky, they never have an issue. Great. You're an outlier. Most people, especially most, and I don't know if we're speaking mostly an American audience or what, but most Americans have or will experience back pain at some point in their life. And I can tell you that if you take really good care of your feet and you give them a lot of novel stimulus, you're a lot less likely to experience that back pain because your feet share a nerve with a lot of the stabilizers of the lower back. So if they get good input, you'll get good output. If you shut down input by putting your foot into a coffin, into the sensory deprivation chamber that is a shoe all the time, again, I'm not opposed to shoes, but if you constantly shut down input to your foot, you're also shutting down a good deal of input to your pelvic floor, which that plays a role in your core. That is the bottom part of your core. You know, the core we want to think of as like a beer can, right? If I leave the beer can unopened, I can stand on top of it and nothing happens. The second I open it, we can smash it. We can bend it. We can break it. If the pelvic floor leaks, there's a leak in the core, right? And there's a link between that and the feet. So
everything is connected.
Everything is connected, especially when we start talking about the nervous system. Not to go in too much of a tangent, but well, I'm not even going to go on that tangent. I'll just say take good care of your feet and it will pay off in spades. Coming back to...
That's why the body needs to be safe. And that's why I feel like when people learn how to brace, everything improves.
Yes. And oftentimes, one of the steps, I do have some people who they don't know how to brace at all, and they don't know how to, you'd be surprised to hear, don't know how to breathe, but you have a couple of options for how you breathe. You can breathe diaphragmatically, which includes a 360-degree expansion. We typically teach that through lateral expansion. Yep, see ribs down right there like she's doing. So we think ribs down, breathe into the kidneys. There are different positions that we'll take people through. I like to teach people in child pose first because it's easiest to feel a diaphragmatic breath from there. You as an embryo learn how to breathe in child pose. Basically, you're curled up into the fetal position, and that's where you learn to breathe first. And that's also...
I didn't know. Just on that note, have you ever done PRI?
Yes, that's actually what I'm referencing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so you learn to breathe in the fetal position, and that's actually where your diaphragm has the most leverage, I guess we'd say, to help you actually breathe. Now, if you're not using your diaphragm, you're one of these, where you breathe with the what I'd call the upper pump, your shoulders, essentially, your traps, your levator scapulae, like all these things up here that are probably chronically tight, and that's where you hold your stress, and you kind of stand like this all the time. So coming back to, you mentioned, I think we were going to talk about the upper cross, lower cross thing. And I was saying, like, I actually still kind of care about that because it's information and it tells me, okay, this person likely lacks motor control over their diaphragm and will have trouble learning how to breathe and brace, which means it is going to be more difficult for this person to squat and deadlift safely and effectively, which means the approach I'm going to need to take with them is to start with teaching them how to use the lower pump, how to use their diaphragm to breathe. And so that's where a lot of the PRI concepts and exercises will come into play. What we do instead of taking instead of putting them in a 90-90, PRI balloon breath, we'll just teach them through various exercises. We tend to practice our breathing as we stretch. So I was working on some of our online videos today, and the cueing for all of our stretching, rather than timing it, oh, hold this for 20 seconds, will be breathe in through your nose and blow out past the point of discomfort for a good 6 to 10 seconds, right? The end of that exhale, when you breathe out past the point of discomfort, sets the stage for the next inhale by putting the bones in the right position for the next breath. But I think I'm probably tangenting and digressing a little bit too far into the weeds here. I want to try to keep things as simple and applicable to the people listening as possible. So I will just say, before your workouts, do a couple of things. I love to start with a few breaths done in child pose or in the fetal position, something where you're curled up and you've got some spinal flexion going maybe, and you can really practice some deep diaphragmatic breaths. This does a couple of things. It does prime the central nervous system. It does prime the core. But we want peaks and valleys in a lifting session in terms of intensity. Most of my clients, at least, or the people that I know who go into the gym in America, like we walk in and we're already stressed. So we're already kind of standing, maybe not at a peak, but at least a high plateau. If we can start with a little bit of a valley and come down first, I find that the intensity of the rest of the workout can peak much higher. It's interesting that the days that people come in,
Just because you said that and because of the neural drive component, I feel like I need to interject at that part because I feel like you can connect this to what I feel you will really want to talk about with the neural drive, because I think this is where a lot of people then get down on themselves for when they're not progressing. And because most of you that come, like people listening to this podcast, I just wanted to reorientate why this is so important, what Brandon's talking about, because might be like, no, I'm just hearing you speak like Tulsa. No, this matters. I asked my coach about the upper cross bullshit, and he's like, yeah, well, that's been disproven from people that actually lift and know how to lift. And that's the point, because the people that you see that have these physiques that are strong as a bull, that look the way that you want to look, that lift the way that actually speaks volumes, they don't have issues like this because they're strong, and you can't get strong if your hips are bung up and if you can't brace. So this stuff is important to get you to that place. And the other thing that you mentioned with the stress at the peak, like, yeah, okay, you want to go in, you want to go burn calories and get your heart rate high. Well, this is the thing. If your lifestyle is full of stress, you're not going to be recovered properly. If you're not recovering properly, you're not going to be building anything. You're going to progress amazingly as a newbie. And then after that, you're just going to keep hitting plateaus. And that is where people get stuck. That's where I got stuck. But mine was dieting related, which is why I wanted to tie it back, because this is where everything ties together. The dieting, I got stuck because I got results. I thought I was building muscle and losing fat at the same time because I did my building. I got strong. I lost fat. It always works to start with. But if you keep hammering the wrong approach, there's a point where it starts to reveal its leaks. And unless you actually stop to patch those leaks up, you're going to keep running into issues. If you want that end result of a physique, we need to start viewing training differently. We need to start viewing it through the lens of training, not just working out and burning calories and moving weights from A to B. And my coach caught me up on this because I've had 3 weeks of being as stressed as a fucking God knows what you want to call it since my bank card got blocked. It's just been stress after stress with that. But finally, it's all sorted. Finally. However, he said to me, you're putting like random comments that have nothing to do with your lifting in your workouts. And this is how I know that you're not neurally engaged in the workouts. Because there is it's hard if you don't get yourself a coach like Brandon or me that pull you out on your bullshit, because you're going to wonder why the program isn't working, why your coaches are shit, why your coach is shit, why the program's shit, why you're shit, because you will most likely think that you're the shit one, because most people berate themselves and beat themselves up for not progressing.
Yeah, real quick, I want to interject on that. Nobody has ever shamed themselves into their goals. They have shamed themselves into the behaviors that lead them further away from their goals. Go ahead.
No, that is actually really important. No one's got anywhere from being hard on themselves. If being hard on yourself worked, it would have got you somewhere by now. If trying to follow the same pattern harder and harder worked, it would have worked by now. So we need to stop trying to force progress, force results, and start wondering why the hell you keep keeping yourself stuck. And to kind of rub salt into the wound, why do you keep denying the fact that you're keeping yourself stuck? Like, you're denying it. You are so much more capable. I think social media has a lot to do with it, because they make you feel like a fragile little, I was going to say fragile pancake, a fragile little petal. But this stuff matters. This is part of your nervous system stuff. If you go to that session, I was saying this before, this can lead into what you want to say, because this is going to tie back to where I interjected. My leg press, I felt like my first set was absolute ass, but I was too lazy to get myself up off the leg press and go and get my lifting straps. As soon as I got my lifting straps and locked myself in, the rest of my sets, as I added weight to every single set, they felt lighter than that first set because I was locked in.
Yeah, Straps are really important. This is a little bit of a tangent, but straps, your hands are the on switch for your nervous system. You are constantly training grip, even when you don't think about it, especially when you're in the gym. If I'm not going to do 100 sets for my back, I'm also not going to do 100 sets for my grip. People often tell me, like, when I ask them why aren't they using straps, they'll tell me, oh, I want to train my grip. I'm like, okay, great. Well, when are you going to train your legs then, or your back? Because you're not training them. You're just training your grip, and you're overtraining it because it got addressed during your bench press. Yes, you are gripping during the bench press enough to train your grip. It got addressed during your warm ups. It got addressed. It's being addressed plenty. I've found that by adding straps into people's workouts, we might do like one set of deadlifts without straps during the warm up, but our working sets are done with straps, and everyone's grip gets stronger as a result of using straps because the grip, again, it's the nervous system. We can, as a coach, we have a trick where we'll gauge someone's readiness with a handshake. And if they come in and they give me a handshake that leaves my knuckles sore, I know they're ready to go. But if they come in and I feel like I just shook a wet noodle, uh, I know they're probably not prepared for a very hard workout today,
I
right?
think, wait, just because you mentioned that handshake part, this is where a lot of people go wrong. He said a handshake. This is a part with grip. Like, yes, grip is important, but it's important to a point. You don't need a grip that is going to handle an RDL that your legs should be able to handle. When
It's also
people
not possible.
exactly when people say that, I freaking hate the whole grip strength is longevity. Like, no, grip strength is an indicator that you're strong as fuck.
That's
Being
it.
strong as fuck is what is
It's
longevity.
it's kind of like, okay, so like we do a movement screen. I am a fan of the FMS because I've gotten great results by using that system to find leaks in people's movement patterns. And it doesn't just keep you safe. Like, yeah, it does help you pick where to put your focus and what not to do, and or maybe how to regress or lateralize an exercise in the beginning.
Can you link
Um,
that to the mobility, not the mobility work? Can you link that into why it's so important to build a foundation first? Because if you think about the shoulders and how a lot of people are hunched over, just because that's what you said, when a lot of people are hunched over, it is
mhm,
kind of stupid when you're trying, well, not stupid, because not stupid on you, stupid on trainers, stupid on
right,
trainers that force you into overhead movements with a barbell or these
right,
other patterns, like expecting you to engage your lats. This is why it's important. You're not going to grow a back if you can't
yeah.
engage your lats, and you can't engage your lats if your shoulders are all hunched over. Continue.
It's
Mm.
kind of like trying to teach someone calculus before they've learned algebra. Like it's not going to happen. You got to go through a series of steps. And some people, yeah, they just naturally have better motor control and they don't have to learn steps. They got lucky and they have these in place. So they can go ahead and do these things. Most people that I work with, they need to relearn some patterns. So the FMS gives me an idea of like where to start some patterns. I think having some kind of standard for movement is really, really helpful to give you a gauge of where to start. But I was what I was yes, I'll link this back in. But where I was going to mention is like the overhead squat is like, okay, this doesn't tell us if we can or can't squat. What it does is gives me an overview of what to expect for the rest of the FMS. Like the rest of your movement patterns, if you've got a really good overhead squat, I can expect that you're probably going to be good at just about everything. So it just gives me an idea. And your grip strength works the same way when they talk about grip being a predictor of longevity. It doesn't necessarily mean go train your grip. You can do that, but it's kind of like mowing the lawn while the house is on fire. Like the lawn will look prettier, but there are a lot of pieces missing from your approach. Uh, you would you would do better to go train and let your grip naturally progress along with your training.
And you
Anyway,
also said the same thing about when people, because I think when people get like back niggles or back injury, they feel like laying off is the best answer. But
oh no, 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 no. Yeah. More often than not, the worst thing for an injured back is going to be a lack of movement. Not necessarily movement through the spine, but a lack of activity. Uh, and I can speak to my own back injuries as I had some severe ones. I was unable to use my right leg for a good part of the year, several years back when I had that one. That leg was just, I had phantom pain, but I still had the leg, but I had phantom pain. Like it was numb first, and then it was just on fire. And then I didn't sleep for months, like not well anyway. I'd sleep for 5 or 10 minutes, wake up with pain, go through my little routine to help alleviate it. That would take 20 minutes. I'd sleep for another 20, 30 minutes, wake up in pain again, do it again. So when we talk about the back, like I've been there, and as a result, this is something that I'm very passionate about. And I've worked with a lot of people now who have also been there, and we've been able to help the vast majority of them. There are always outliers that, hey, I can't help this person. I need to refer out. But more often than not, back pain is, and even most of the injuries that I see aren't really injuries as much as subtle tweaks, and they just need some basic spinal hygiene, if you will. And that would include like motor control and stuff. Some are genuinely injuries. Does that change the protocol? It only changes where we start on the spectrum of training. We can still do some upper body stuff that doesn't hurt, and that will help. Exercise in and of itself is analgesic, but coming back to the patterns thing and the big toe and the nervous system and the joint by joint approach, if we can first get more neural input to the muscles that serve as stabilizers. And I don't really like the term stabilizer because all muscles move and all muscles stabilize depending on what you're doing. If you're standing up, your quads are not knee extensors. They are stabilizing you isometrically. If we're talking about the rectus femoris, they're stabilizing across both the hip and knee. If we're talking about the rest of the quads, they're kind of just stabilizing at the knee. If we're talking about the hamstrings, they're not knee benders, knee flexors, right? They work as a braking system in the swing phase of a sprint. They work isometrically to stabilize the knee and the hip. They assist and synergize with the glutes in femoral control. When it comes to extension and flexion, they work eccentrically in the squat. They do kick on. You may not necessarily get a lot of hypertrophy out of them, but they do work in the squat in the same way when you flex a bicep, your triceps kick on to keep your elbow stable. You just can't help it. They're going to kick on a little bit. And yes, there's reciprocal inhibition where these downregulate a little bit more to allow you to get into flexion, but they're still going to kick on some, right? Nothing works in isolation.
That because you're mentioning the bicep and the tricep thing, something that I've learned even more recently is the more that you train your biceps, the better your bench, because your elbows, you will experience more elbow pain if you're not training your bicep for the fact that it crosses that joint there, and it's what's eccentrically protecting the elbow joint when you're doing bench presses. And
the biceps act as a stabilizer during the bench press. Yes.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of people understand how all of these different things tie together. And it's like, well, if your biceps aren't functioning the way they need to function, or if you're in this continual position like this, I had an issue that stemmed from my neck all the way down to my fingers for 2 years because of how tight my pec minor was. Like these things, like it was a wrist issue, it was an everything issue, and it was all coming from my pec minor, which then transferred into something into my shoulder blade, which for the first time ever, it is like pain-free. I think it's the wrong arm. I don't even know what arm it is now because of the fact that it's pain-free. But yeah, because you said something on the hamstring, I want to go back to that. A lot of people feel like their hamstrings are tight, but it's not tightness, it's weakness.
It's both weakness or a lack of action at the hip and glute, posterior hip cap. Again, you have muscles deep to the glute that aren't glutes. They are deep deep hip rotators. They're really, I would look at them like the rotator cuff of the hip. They're rotators, but they're stabilizers. And if you don't have good action at the hip, you will get. Shirley Sarman is kind of a really, really good. I think she's a physical therapist. She's kind of famous in some ways here. She wrote some books that were very formative for my thinking, and I have yet to see the concepts in there not prove themselves out. And she said, when you have an overtight, overworked, or strained muscle, look for a weak or ineffective synergist. So it can be that the hamstrings are weak. It can also be, and it's kind of a combination of all of the above. It's always multifactorial, but If the glutes don't do their job, the hamstrings will pull double duty. If you and I are moving a couch and I put my side down, but we're on a time limit, you've got to now pull double duty. Or if you go to work one day and some three people don't show up, you've now got to do their jobs and yours. You're not going to do a good job and you're going to be burned out. You're going to do four bad jobs and you're going to go home worn out and not be able to do the thing that you're actually there to do. Same thing with the hamstrings. Same thing often with the biceps and I say biceps because it's two-headed. It's not called bicep. I'm very pedantic. I'm sorry. But same thing with those muscles as they work as synergists and stabilizers depending on what we're doing. The hamstrings.
No, just because you said biceps and you made a huge deal of that. Guess what, guys? Your hamstrings are also called biceps, but it's biceps.
Yes, they're the biceps of the leg. Yeah.
Sorry,
Biceps femoris and semitendinosus, semimembranosus. And then you could actually say your adductors are partially hamstrings. Some of them are. Your adductors don't purely adduct. You have some that adduct flex and some that adduct extend, but none of them purely adduct. That doesn't mean don't train them that way, but
just because that was the part that we didn't actually touch on that you were going on about, because then you skipped the other part, which was important. But this is where the internal rotation is really important, and something that I realized. Yes, like I'm someone who's very big on big toes. I've always been big on big toes, but it doesn't mean that I couldn't do a better job of it. And yes, I'm always thinking big toes, but this time when I did my stiff leg deadlift yesterday, I really focused on pushing the arch of my foot down and bringing and like trying to feel into my adductors. And for the first time ever, I actually felt my adductors while I was doing my stiff leg deadlift. But I had to pull 15 kilos off my stiff leg deadlift to be able to this is where, just going back into the foundation, this is where we need to be okay to pull things out, because we can keep pushing things until things break. But going back to your point there, this is where, if you don't understand or have a coach to guide you through this, you can really do some damage, because if you then go and stretch or foam roll those hamstrings, you can pull out your back, because those hamstrings are now doing everything. They're the only thing that is now like clinging onto your pelvis. If you then relax those hamstrings, your back doesn't have the same support that it did before. But I'll let you go on.
Yeah. Well, let me back up, because I feel like I'm going into a direction that might leave people more confused than actually being helpful. So I wanted to come back to the mobility piece, and then I want to put this all together. So talking about how to stretch and how we do this. So like, we do stretch beforehand. We just keep it very brief to make sure we go through all the ranges of motion, and we stretch focused on mobile joints, and then we focus on stabilizing stable joints. So to give you a brief overview, ankle should be mobile, knee stable, hip mobile, low back stable. And if you lack stability at the low back, you will find stiffness in the next joint, whether that be the hips. Oh, my back hurts, so my hamstrings are tight and that's causing my back pain. It's more likely your hamstrings are tight because your hips are locking up. And they're locking up because they're trying desperately to stabilize your spine, but they don't work that way. They can't really do that very well. So they do a bad job, and it leaves you in pain because your spine is not stable.
What are your favorite workouts for your hips?
Posterior hip cap stretch is kind of a non-negotiable. After that, the basic 90-90 external and internal rotation. Now, you can make lasting mobility change, and this was how I got myself to a pain-free deep squat after all of my back issues, because I grew up with FAI. I grew up with knee pain. I had back pain since my teens, and then some catastrophic injuries thereafter. And the way that I have approached this for myself is the same way that I approach it with clients. Provide stability to the spine, but give it mobility at the hips and the ankles and the thoracic spine. The shoulders get a little bit hinky because I would say the scapula is there for stability, but it has to move to provide stability. So we're just going to simplify it and call it a stable joint, even though it moves. The glenohumeral joint is a mobile joint. Elbow, stable, wrist, mobile, and we can just keep going on forever. Cervical, mobile, right? We don't stretch cervical though. There's a different deal going on with the spine. So when you want mobility at the spine, you actually approach that a different way. But I digress. We'll go through these stretches. My big ones for hip mobility, I want to see hip separation, internal and external rotation. And then I want to see abduction. So hip separation is one hip in flexion while the other is in extension. There are a lot of stretches that do this, but the favorite, I think they call it, we call it the Spider-Man stretch. I've seen it called world's greatest stretch. Again, how you do this is more important than what you're doing.
Can I just add on one more for that one? Something that I think is a really good one as well as the pretzel stretch, because you do that on the
The
floor.
pretzel is, yes.
I
do have to be careful.
I was going to say, I
Go
do
ahead.
the posterior as well, because you can pull your leg over, even though it's not as effective because you're not against the force of the ground. I feel like the pretzel gets into that capsule if you learn how to do it properly, but it also forces you to mobilize your T-spine.
Yes.
But yeah, that's something that I wanted to say there because I think it's a hugely important exercise.
It is. It needs to be taught, though. I think a lot of people will do it, and it'll end up being a low back stretch. Oftentimes, when I've tried to teach it, even with guidance, people will turn it into a low back stretch. Which another Shirley Sarman quote, and I've seen this play out time and time again as well with my back pain clients, is rotational stretching is particularly insulting to the lower back once you go beyond that 13 or 14 degrees that you're born with, and if you're already tight. Stretching isn't the way to regain your rotation. There's a better way to do that, but that's not a conversation for this podcast. There are actually 3 versions of the pretzel, fun fact, and I have never been good at the third one, but I do love the first 2. And we can talk about that more off pod. But going off these stretches, anyway, we do this before the workout to kind of prime the pump. If you foam roll a little bit first, it does tend to make the stretches feel better. It makes your joints feel better. We just don't foam roll and then jump in. We foam roll, we go through some stretching, we go through some active warm-up. So like we go through a circuit of, we'll do an unloaded single leg deadlift, lateral squat, split squat, and some deep squatting just to kind of prime up the hips. And then we might do some shoulder stuff as well. And then we'll go into our workout. And if you're in a time crunch, yes, you can jump into the workout and just do warm-up sets. You'll spend the same amount of time, but you'll only be warm in that one pattern that you warmed up. It's bench day. I'm going to go warm up my bench. Okay, cool. You can also warm up your entire body and ensure that you continue making progress with mobility by doing the stretches first. The more often you do it, the more of that mobility you get to keep. The other way you get to keep it, what I personally like doing is right after my zone 2 days, as soon as I get off the Stairmaster or treadmill, whatever I end up using for zone 2 cardio, 2-minute holds for multiple sets in every stretch makes it a whole lot more permanent. That's a bonus point, but I want to come back to why the stretching can leave a permanent change in your mobility, because strength training in and of itself is mobility. It's also stability. And if you think about, I like the way Gray Cook puts it. When you have newfound mobility, you've got about a 10-minute window after you've done that stretch. You've got about a 10-minute window of extra flexibility. You're going to feel a little bit unstable. If you then challenge it and you're unstable because you're getting all this extra feedback. Imagine going from a dark room to a bright room. You're getting more input. It takes a minute for your eyes to adjust. It's kind of the same thing with mobility. If I do a bunch of stretching and then stand up, especially if I were doing 2-minute holds, when I stand up at first, I'm like, man, I feel great, but I'm also like really kind of unstable. Okay, you're getting a lot more neural input than you're used to. Give it a minute and then go challenge it with stability. Oftentimes walking does that. But if we go do it with our lift, we go ahead and warm up our first lift and we start doing our sets, we're challenging that newfound mobility with stability. It's kind of like hitting the save button in the nervous system. So let's say you gained, I'm just going to use an arbitrary measurement system of like points, right? Let's say you gained 10 points of mobility. I'm not going to use angles or anything specific. I just want to say you gained this much mobility. After 10 minutes, you kind of reset to your norm, right? But if we challenge it with,
It's like a PNF stretch.
Like a PNF stretch, any stretch, yeah, kind of a PNF stretch. Actually, you get to keep a little bit more, so it doesn't fully reset. You kind of get to keep a little bit more there.
That's why.
But if we go,
like stretching and interspersing it with load is the best way to make it permanent. The repetition.
Yes, that's where I'm headed. Is like, let repetition. So like we did the stretch, we got this mobility opened up. The joints are feeling good. I'm feeling good. And that to me is enough evidence. Even if a study says, oh, this didn't predict injury or this didn't do that. Like my experience says otherwise, because I work with people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90s. And they all feel a whole lot better going into the workout if we foam roll and stretch first. So we always foam roll and stretch first. I don't care what it says on the paper. I care what my clients tell me, and I care what I personally feel when I work out. And I can tell you, my joints feel a lot better. and that means the workout's going to go better. So that to me is enough evidence. But if you take that mobility or that flexibility and you challenge it with stability by loading it, you're getting the double whammy. You're getting the best of both worlds. And you get to keep, instead of like, okay, here's your temporary, instead of resetting, you get to keep a little bit more each time. The one thing that I don't think you can stretch by loading it, by lifting, is the posterior hip capsule. Because if you don't have access to it in the first place, when you try to load it, you're going to compensate with external rotation or spinal flexion or spinal rotation and lateral flexion.
By the
You're going to
internal,
compensate elsewhere. You'll see people who squat all day and still don't have glutes, and then you'll see people who do a couple of squats and their glutes grow. The people whose glutes grow, they have access to their posterior hip capsule. The people whose glutes don't, they don't have access to that hip cap.
that
Right?
foundation
So
matters.
that
Sorry,
foundation, yeah.
like this is tying back to what I just said. This is why
Yeah.
this matters, even if aesthetics is your goal, because you're never going to get there if you don't do this. And quoting from me, because I want you to take this into the stretch thing, just because I want to repeat this again myself. If you put most of your focus, most of your attention and energy into scales, fat loss, another deficit, needing to see immediate gratification, this is even, because this is where I wanted you to tie it into what you're saying. If you just want to see the numbers on the page of your logbook go up and up and up and up, or the scale go down, or yourself shrinking, or worry about the nuances in your food, you aren't going to get to where you want to be, regardless of how perfect that plan is and how disciplined you are. Because that is what I mentioned with, if your mindset is still in the same place that got you stuck, because that is not where you should focus, but that is all you will ever know how to focus until you get a coach that challenges you. And if you don't like being challenged, that's kind of like
No challenge, no change.
that's like what you said about, like,
Yeah.
think about your kids. Would you just let them do whatever the hell they want to do and get themselves in trouble, or get themselves into a place where they are going to end up in a worse place than not? No, you want to discipline them effectively, not to the point where you're just doing it for the sake of doing it. Like there is a dose that you need to give them that is going to teach them to grow. That is the same with yourself. And this is where this all fits together, because if you don't allow yourself to work with your coach because you just want results now, you just want that 6 week, that 8 week, that 4 month minimum. And your first question to the coach is there a minimum term with you? How long is this going to take? Not just selling yourself, kind of like what you mentioned with when you're reading books. You don't want to just read words on the screen because you're going to forget it. You want to immerse yourself into the book. Fuck, we have so much to talk about next podcast. You want to immerse yourself into the book, because if you actually embody the vibration of the book, and no, it's not woo-woo, if you embody that vibration of the book, you will then start to implement the way of doing things. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. But if you apply the slight edge principles to everything, it's like, well, if I'm not going to, if I'm constantly berating myself or shaming myself, that's going to slide me backwards. What can I do with this error, which isn't really an error? It's a data signal to move me forward. So that is where you fail. Where you should be focusing is learning how to optimize for this stuff, learning how to optimize for performance, getting stronger, having more energy, and a better life overall. Because if you keep trying to absorb all of this information instead of just getting really freaking good at the basics, like you told me about the way you're approaching reading, because I used to have a really good reading habit and now it's just taking me longer to read my books. But I am absorbing way more podcasts than usual because I'm trying to understand how to amplify my podcasts. So I'm reading a little listening. Regardless, it's, you want to go deeper with what you're doing so you can get more out of it instead of getting nowhere far. And this is why this matters. This is why this matters. And it starts with the foundations.
Yeah, depth matters more than volume every time. Just like intensity, doing 10 sets of something won't work if the first set wasn't stimulative either. Like, if one set doesn't provide any stimulus, 10 won't either. You've got to make it work. So, but coming back to where we were going, is form follows function. If the joint works better and functions better and has better motor control, better neural input, the muscles that act on that joint grow better and they get a better quality of stimulus. They don't require as much volume to get the same level of stimulus, or they get a better stimulus than they ever would have with all the sets in the world that would just add to fatigue rather than add actual stimulus. So that's kind of what I want to kind of close out with practical takeaways and what you can do to implement some of the ramblings that we've given you today. Is keep your workouts simple. You don't need a complex bro split. You can just get away with 2 to 3 days a week of full body if that's all you have time for. If you're very purposeful with your practice of training, go in, get a quick foam roll, get a quick stretch, make it last no more than 10 or 15 minutes total for both of those things. Like get in, get out, and then start warming up your first movement. Your movement patterns to pick from, think patterns, push, pull, and then think leg push, leg pull. If you can pick those 4 and you get really, really skilled in applying those 4, you'll do very, very well. Those patterns do break out into, more complex variations, and that's where a good coach can come in handy. But you can make some progress on your own in the meantime, while you're still debating on whether or not you want to take that next step and get really, really good and pull out your best potential.
Best potential.
And I think that's about all I got. And I think the main, probably a big takeaway there is that the how, and we've said this, I think probably every episode, how you do something is more important than what you're doing. So like, yes, reading books, rather than try to read 100 books this month, how about you try to read one and get everything you can out of it? Pick the best, most bang for your buck you can get, like the highest ROI book possible that is recommended by all the people who you want to be like the most, or who are where you want to be. Listen to them in terms of their book recommendations. Pick the one that seems to be on all of their lists and read it slowly and mindfully, digging in and trying to interpret not just the words on the page, but the spirit of the author, what attitude they have, how they view the world. Try to get to know the author. I said this, I think, before we started recording, but you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, which is why I read, because I want to spend time with these authors. I want to be like them. They are where I want to be. That's why I'm reading their book. So I'm not just reading a book and getting some words. I'm spending time with a person the best way that I can, so that I can be more like them, so that I can learn more from them. And that, I think, applies to your fitness journey as well. Rather than hanging out with your old friends who want to go out drinking on the weekends, maybe you find some, and I'm not saying abandon your old friends, but I am saying maybe start shifting more time towards the people who are where you want to be, so that you can learn from them. You become what you behold. So be very careful what you put in your sights.
I love that. Yeah. And this is the part. I feel like where you put your focus is what expands. Where you, like, when you change your perspective on something, the way that the world is changes with that, because your perspective, your focus, it dictates your actions. Your beliefs are so tightly controlled by your thoughts, which your thoughts are then tightly controlled by your beliefs. It's like this recurring cycle. And until you start to put yourself outside, well, first realize that you're in a box, allow yourself to get challenged, to slowly, kind of like that principle that you mentioned, we want to slowly make errors in the right direction, because right now your way of doing things, the program that is correct for your brain isn't correct for the results that you want to be. So we need to slowly put in code errors, but only slightly, the slight edge, read the book, slightly.
Yeah.
And then slightly you get off track into the right direction. You're off track from the wrong direction. And we want to keep adding the layers in that direction until it becomes who you are. And this is where the external validation and using fat loss metrics isn't going to serve you long term. Yes, fat loss has a place, but there is no freaking point putting you into a deficit when you're going to keep unraveling your shit and ending up worse than ever in your life, because not only is your body going to turn into a potato because you're losing muscle in the process, but your brain is going to turn into a potato because now you don't have belief in yourself. If at least we can keep that brain, as in like you believing in yourself and only failing once or twice and using that as positive momentum, or learning from something and then shifting your brain into a potato fry because at least then it's crisp enough. So it's the only thing I can think about that has like the analogy of it can be a mashed potato, or it can be a potato, or it can be crisper. If we can,
it's malleable and changeable.
Yeah, exactly. Your brain is malleable and changeable, and so is your body. But
even into old age, neuroplasticity does like it's still a thing even into old age. You can learn new things. You can change a lot of things about your brain, even well into your 80s. I've seen it.
It's just that it needs a lot more strategy, and it needs you to read the book Rewire by Nicole Vignola, because
That's a good one.
It's so good. She will empathize with you and make you realize why things are way harder once you turn 25, and even harder once you turn 30, because your brain is a lot more ingrained, but it doesn't mean it can't change. And if you're going to stay fixed in the same patterns this is where a lot of, because I think this ties into everything that you said, this is where immersing yourself, because I feel like my best clients, and I'm going to reiterate this as my clients, because you have people in your facility that are already engaging with each other. And that's why Brandon's clients do so well, because they do engage in the community. Mike being online, which is probably so beneficial if there is a community that you actually put yourself into. And something that I continually say to my girls is, the more that you energetically put into being a part of this group chat, the more that you speak, the more that you talk about your struggles, because we are so much better at helping other people with struggles than we are our own. You actually start to like repeat the same things that I teach you. And it starts to be
the best way to learn is by teaching.
And it starts to be this community. And this is what's really important, because if you're only going into something to expect a 12-week result, it's not going to happen. And that's why we're tying things in this direction. It's why the way that we want to direct this conversation is taking on board anything that you guys have questions for. But in the end, what is it that you want, and how can this align to your actions? Are your actions even aligned? What do you need to start to do differently? Because Brandon gave you some really good takeaways in terms of mobility, in terms of what to think about when you're moving your body. I'm going to put a playlist down below. I'm going to send it to you. It has a bunch of mine. If you have any that you want to add into the playlist, I'm going to get Brandon to give me some to add into the playlist, or I might see if I can collaborate with you because it's on YouTube. But my takeaway from you is to figure out what is it that you've been trying to change for at least 6 months. What hasn't worked? Get granular. Be your worst critic, because being your worst critic isn't shame. There is shaming and there is critiquing. Critiquing is supposed to be productive. Figure out what hasn't gone well, then end with what has gone well, so you can amplify on that. And once you get a good gauge of where you want to be, that is when we can start to move forward. But above anything, start to become aware of what exactly it is that has stopped you from getting the results in the past. Is it sabotaging yourself with like lunchtime or this or that and the other? And give yourself the patience to change. Don't come into something with a timeline, because the second that you put a timeline on something, you failed before you've begun, because there's going to be that pressure. I had a client come to me who had a timeline on things because she had a limited amount of funds that she was going to put towards me because it was post-pregnancy. And I'm like, well, I can try my best, but I'm going to say that this is not going to work because of where you are right now. And if you're trying to fix all of this and then lose the weight, that's not going to happen. So it took us a while to unlearn all of that, to try to get rid of the rush. And then she started to fall in love with the training aspect. It's very hard to do these things if you're still so tightly holding on to wanting to see results yesterday.
Yep. Okay. That's all I got.
So I cannot wait to have you listen and give us feedback to this and hear us on the next.
That's in questions.
Yes, give us some questions, please. We really want questions. I know that we're kind of filming this 3 or 4 weeks in advance, but if you have any questions on any of these along the way, do shoot them to us, because even though we're ahead of time, we will schedule them in and we will link things to how they can best help you and kind of nut things in the bull. Because, for example, when we were talking about someone that does that says we need to try to fit glutes in here and here and here, it can make sense in your head in some way. So we want to explain why it makes it so believable for you, why they are so convincing, so that we can get you to see what it is that best suits you. Because like what Brandon said, everything has nuance.
Yeah, everything has nuance.
And what was that quote again that we were talking about? Repetition. Say it 3 times.
Repetition legitimizes. I actually got that from music, but it very much is a universal principle. You might say repetition ingrains, like etching your name in wood with a knife. Every repetition makes that etch a little bit deeper and a lot more prominent and prevalent. So you want to be careful that you're etching what you want and practicing good quality reps, because every bad rep is a miss. And now it's going to take that much more work to make this the line that you do want stand out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And if you want to rush the process, you're just going to keep etching the wrong thing.
Miss a lot. You're going to miss a lot. Yeah. If you don't have time to do it right the first time, when will you have time to do it over?
I wanted to say that before. I completely forgot. Thank you for saying that. I knew there was a reason. Was to say it again.
If you don't have time to do it right the first time, in other words, you're in a rush, when will you have time to do it over?
Because right now, this very moment is the youngest you'll ever be. This moment right now, you have the most time you'll ever have. And every single time that you keep trying to rush it, you're going to feel like you have less time. And then you're going to turn 40 and you're going to feel like you're getting too old. It's too late. You've already wasted so much time. I need to make up for lost time. And I can't do that now. I can't just focus on one. I have less years to play with. Okay, come back to me in 3 years and tell me you're not in the same position. I think that's a really good point to end this, because that's huge. That is huge. We want to etch the right patterns. Love you all. I know you love us because I said so. But yes. Bye.
Bye.